Some truths are not buried by time. They are simply too large to be seen. Among the thousands of pages of his trance readings, there exists a testimony from Edgar Cayce that challenges the very foundation of our reality. They called him the sleeping prophet, but in these lines he is something else entirely, a conscious witness. This is not just another spiritual text. It is a voice that reaches across the decades to describe, with unnerving clarity, the mechanics of the soul's journey after the final breath. His central message is delivered without hesitation. No one who has ever lived has truly vanished. The soul does not die. It simply transitions into another state of being. There are no gates, the voice insists. There is only movement, and this movement is eternal. On its own, this account is a profound piece of mystical history. But what if it isn't an isolated prophecy? What if Cayce's words are a missing piece of a much larger puzzle, a map of the afterlife drawn in the 1930s that is now being independently verified by cardiologists studying near-death experiences and by philosophers who wrote about the soul's journey over 2 millennia ago? This investigation is not just about what one man saw. It is about an astonishing convergence of evidence, a pattern suggesting that the modern science of consciousness is only now rediscovering a truth the ancient world always knew. This journey doesn't just suggest the brain isn't the source of consciousness, it presents the evidence that consciousness itself is eternal. To understand the weight of these revelations, we must first understand the man through whom they came. Edgar Cayce was not a guru on a mountaintop. He was a devout Christian, a Sunday school teacher, and a photographer by trade. A humble man from rural Kentucky with no formal education beyond the 8th grade. He never sought fame, and for most of his life, the information that poured through him was as much a mystery to him as it was to everyone else. He did not call himself a psychic or a mystic. The process was simple and bizarre. He would lie down, enter a state of sleep, and his voice would change. It would speak with an authority and an intelligence that his waking mind did not possess, diagnosing complex illnesses for people he had never met, and describing historical and spiritual realms with the clarity of a first-hand witness. When he awoke, he remembered none of it. He was a conduit, a channel for what he simply called the information. In fact, Cayce himself often wrestled with the content of his own readings, especially those that spoke of concepts like reincarnation, which seemed to conflict with his Christian faith. He was, in a sense, the first skeptic of his own work. It was only after decades of seeing the undeniable positive results of his medical readings, curing the supposedly incurable, that he reluctantly accepted the profound and consistent spiritual philosophy that emerged from his trances. This was not a man seeking to invent a new religion. This was a man forced by overwhelming evidence to report on a reality he could not otherwise explain. He was, in every sense, the antithesis of the charismatic spiritual leader. He did not seek followers. He did not write books proclaiming his own wisdom. Instead, every session was treated like a clinical procedure. A stenographer was always present, meticulously transcribing every word. Each reading was numbered, catalogued, and preserved, creating an archive of over 14,000 documents. This wasn't folklore. It was a systematically recorded library of information that seemingly came from beyond the veil. The process itself took a heavy physical and emotional toll. It was not a blissful meditation. It was a profound sacrifice. Cayce often emerged from his trances exhausted, as if he had run a marathon. He was a man bearing a great weight, driven not by a desire for notoriety, but by a deep sense of duty to help those who came to him in pain. This raises the most important question for any investigator of consciousness. Why him? Why would this cosmic-level information choose a vessel so seemingly ordinary? Perhaps that was precisely the point. The information to be delivered with purity may have required a channel free of intellectual static, unburdened by academic theories or religious dogma, a consciousness so clear and humble that the message could be transcribed without the distortion of ego. He was not the author of this knowledge. He was its instrument, a reluctant witness whose very normalcy is what makes his testimony so utterly compelling and so difficult for skeptics to dismiss. As we open the pages of this forgotten testimony, the core of Edgar Cayce's vision unfolds. It is a map of the soul's journey, beginning at the very moment of the last breath. The first and most profound revelation is this: death is not a void, but a process of awakening. You do not lose yourself, you find yourself. Cayce describes it as the removal of a mask. The identity you carried, Your name, your profession, your successes, your failures, is seen for what it was, a temporary costume. What remains is your true self. He struggles with human language to define it, using terms like energy, vibration, or a structure of light. This essence is not judged by an external God. It is simply and finally known. The afterlife he portrays is not a static place, but a realm of pure information, a state of being where there are no physical bodies, only light, and no time, only understanding. This light, he insists, does not blind. It fills. It knows you. It remembers with you. In this realm, the soul begins the most important part of its education. It sees not just what it did in its earthly life, but the consequences of every action. As he states, you see not actions, but their traces, not words, but the feelings they evoked. This is the beginning of the Great Review. He speaks of the soul entering a vibrational field where it achieves a state of absolute clarity. This clarity is not emotional in the human sense. It is not joy or suffering, but pure, unadulterated understanding. It is here that the concept of judgment is radically reframed. You do not go to a heaven or a hell created by a deity. Instead, you enter the deepest truth of yourself, and you begin to feel with perfect fidelity everything that others felt because of you. Imagine not just remembering an argument, but simultaneously experiencing the pain your words caused in the other person. Imagine not just recalling a moment of kindness, but feeling the warmth and hope that your action ignited in someone's heart. This, Cayce explains, is the true judgment. It is not a punishment inflicted by God. It is a law of spiritual physics. It is your own soul, finally experiencing the full energetic signature of its own journey through the lives of others. In this state, there are no secrets. The soul sees its own patterns, its attachments, the love it managed to give and the pain it failed to heal. Some souls, he notes, remain longer in the initial stages of this transition, in a state he calls the grey field or twilight. These are often souls who left suddenly, or who were bound by intense, unresolved earthly emotions. They are not in hell, but they are caught in a loop of their own making, repeating an unfinished thought or a powerful regret. They do not suffer, but neither do they rest. The path forward, he says, is not a staircase to climb, but an awareness to achieve. The moment the thought of forgiveness, for others and for oneself, truly arises, the journey into the greater light begins. This is the moment our investigation pivots. Cayce's vision, recorded in the 1930s, could be dismissed as a beautiful spiritual metaphor, but it ceases to be a metaphor the moment it aligns with a massive body of modern, independent evidence. The life review he described in such detail is now one of the most consistently reported elements in thousands of near-death experience cases. Dr. Bruce Grayson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia and arguably the world's leading NDE researcher, has spent over 4 decades studying these accounts. His work, documented in prestigious medical journals, shows that a panoramic, moral life review is a cross-cultural phenomenon. People from entirely different religious and social backgrounds report the same thing, reliving their entire lives, often from the perspective of the other people involved. This isn't a dying brain's hallucination. Hallucinations are chaotic and personal. This experience is structured, consistent, and transformative. Furthermore, this modern scientific data is itself an echo of a much older piece of wisdom. Over 2,400 years ago, the Greek philosopher Plato, in the final book of the Republic, tells the story of a soldier named who dies in battle and returns to life. Describes the afterlife in stunning detail. He speaks of a place where souls must account for their deeds on earth, reviewing their actions to understand their true moral weight before choosing their next life. If what Cayce, the NDE survivors, and Plato are all describing is true, then the implications are staggering. We are not our bodies. We are immortal consciousness having a temporary human experience. This single idea changes everything we thought we knew about loss, purpose, and what it means to be alive. It suggests that our lives are not a random series of events, but a meaningful curriculum designed for the education of the soul. And the convergence doesn't stop with ancient Greece. If we turn our gaze to the east, we find another, even more detailed map of this same territory. The Bardo Thodol, known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is an ancient manual for the consciousness navigating the states between death and rebirth. It describes the soul encountering luminous, peaceful deities and wrathful, terrifying ones. But it reveals that these are not external beings. They are projections of the soul's own karma, the embodiment of its own past thoughts and actions. The core teaching is identical to Cayce's. The afterlife is a mirror. What you encounter there is not a judgment from outside, but a confrontation with the content of your own consciousness. The Tibetan masters taught that by understanding this during life, one could navigate the after-death state without fear, recognizing every vision, beautiful or terrifying, as a reflection of oneself. This is what the philosopher Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy, the idea that a single universal truth lies at the heart of all the world's great wisdom traditions. The names change, the symbols vary, but the core message remains the same. Our life on Earth is a profound ethical challenge, a training ground for the soul. The kindness we show, the forgiveness we offer, the wisdom we gain, these are not just abstract virtues. They are, according to this vast body of evidence, the very tools we will need to navigate the next stage of our own eternal existence. This changes the purpose of life, from a pursuit of material success to a mission of spiritual refinement. In his explorations of the afterlife, Cayce's consciousness traveled through realms of profound clarity. He described the soul's education, its reunion with loved ones, and its preparation for the next stage of its journey. But there was a boundary, a point beyond which his detailed descriptions would falter, and the clarity of his language would dissolve into metaphor and awe. He was asked repeatedly, what awaits the soul after all its reincarnations are complete? What is the final destination? His answer was not a description, but the report of a sensation. He spoke of consciousness merging with its source, a state of infinite light, which he was careful to explain, was not blinding but embracing. In this ultimate realm, the individual I as we know it dissolves. But it is not annihilation, it is a homecoming. The transcripts of his readings describe it as a merging, a state of peace or music without sound. The single drop of water, having completed its long journey through the clouds, the rivers, and the earth, finally returns to the ocean. When pressed for more detail, Cayce's voice from the trance would often grow quiet. He would simply state that the experience of this union is a knowledge so profound that our human language collapses when it tries to contain it. He was shown, but he could not fully speak it. This concept of an ultimate, ineffable reality is not unique to Cayce. It is once again a central pillar of the perennial philosophy. The Neoplatonist philosopher Plotinus, writing in the 3rd century, described the soul's final journey as a return to the One, a primal, transcendent source from which all existence emanates. Plotinus, like Cayce, insisted that the One is beyond all description and attributes. It is not good or beautiful or conscious in the way we understand those terms, because it is the source of all goodness, beauty, and consciousness. To describe it would be to limit it. Similarly, in the Hindu tradition of Advaita Vedanta, the ultimate goal of the soul, Atman, is to realize its fundamental identity with the ultimate reality, Brahman. The famous Sanskrit phrase, Tat Tvam Asi, means thou art that. It is not that the soul goes to God, it is that the soul awakens to the fact that it has always been an expression of God, temporarily veiled by the illusion of a separate self. This final mystery, this limit of language, is perhaps the most powerful piece of evidence. If the afterlife were merely a product of the human imagination, we would have filled in this blank with elaborate, comforting fantasies of an eternal paradise. But instead, from the most profound and diverse sources, from Cayce, from ancient philosophers, from modern NDE accounts, we receive the same honest, humbling report. The final truth is a reality so vast and so luminous, it can only be experienced, not explained. It is a silence that contains all sound, a unity that contains all souls. It is home. With this incredible convergence of evidence, from a 20th century mystic, modern scientific research, and ancient philosophy, why isn't this map of consciousness front-page news? Why is it relegated to the fringes of spiritual inquiry? The answer lies in a fundamental conflict of paradigms. Mainstream science operates on a materialist assumption that consciousness is a product of the brain, a ghost in the machine. When the machine breaks, the ghost must vanish. From this perspective, the rich, structured, and life-changing accounts of near-death experiences must be dismissed as something else. They are labeled as hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain, or the release of endorphins, or some other form of neurological noise. But these explanations consistently fail to account for the core evidence. They cannot explain how a person with a clinically dead brain, with no measurable electrical activity, can later report on verifiable conversations and events that occurred in a different room. As Dr. Pim van Lommel, the Dutch cardiologist, points out in his groundbreaking study published in the medical journal The Lancet, if consciousness was solely a product of brain function, such lucid and organized experiences should be impossible during a cardiac arrest. Yet, they happen. The materialist explanation can't account for the fact that a 4-year-old boy in Ohio, studied by Dr. Ian Stevenson, could have detailed accurate memories of being a World War II fighter pilot, including the names of his crewmates and the specific model of his plane. The evidence isn't ignored because it is weak. It is ignored because it is revolutionary. It presents a direct challenge to the foundational beliefs of our modern worldview. It suggests that we are not biological robots living in a meaningless universe, but eternal beings on a journey of purpose. To accept this evidence is not just to change a scientific theory, it is to change ourselves. The resistance is not just scientific, it is deeply cultural. We have built our modern world on the promise of control. We seek to control nature, our bodies, and our economies. The idea of death as a simple biological endpoint, a final off switch, is in a strange way comforting to this worldview. It is a known variable. It is final. It means the game has clear rules and a definitive end. The reality described by Cayce, Plato, and NDE survivors is far more challenging. It introduces a variable we cannot measure, control, or fully comprehend, the immortality of the soul and the law of karma. It suggests that our actions have consequences that ripple far beyond this single lifetime. This is not a comforting thought for a culture often built on short-term gain and disposability. It presents a profound moral accountability. If we truly knew in our bones that we would one day experience the pain we inflict on others, would our world not have to change on a fundamental level? Therefore, the reductive explanations, the lack of oxygen, or dying brain theories persist not because they are scientifically robust, but because they are psychologically convenient. They act as a firewall, protecting the current paradigm from a truth it is not yet ready to integrate. They allow us to continue to see the universe as a collection of dead matter, rather than as a living, conscious, and interconnected whole. The evidence is not being hidden by some grand conspiracy. It is being filtered out by a collective worldview that is not yet prepared for the radical re-enchantment of the universe. So, we are left at a crossroads of belief and evidence, a place where the testimony of a sleeping prophet, the wisdom of an ancient philosopher, and the data from modern scientific inquiry all point in the same direction. They point to a single profound truth. We are more than we think we are. Death is not a wall, but a doorway, and life is not a random accident, but a journey home. To fear death, as Cayce warned, is to fear your true self, because after the final breath, you are left without masks, without roles, only you as you are. The real work then is not to prepare for death, but to begin the process of meeting yourself now, while you are still alive. To live in such a way that when your life review comes, you can watch it not with regret, but with understanding and compassion for the journey you undertook. If the philosopher, the mystic, and the scientist have all arrived at the same map, perhaps this was never a story about death at all. Perhaps these are the forgotten instructions on how to truly live. Now that you have seen this evidence, you cannot unsee it. It is a seed planted in your perception of the possible. If this investigation resonates with the questions you've been asking, subscribe to Continue the Great Exploration. This concludes our inquiry for now. A synthesis of documented evidence and timeless philosophical questions grounded in the sources that guide our journey. What truth did you recognize today?